People always ask me when I knew my marriage was over. They expect some dramatic confession, a screaming match, or a photograph that shattered everything. The truth is much quieter than that. Sometimes a single sentence, arriving on an ordinary Tuesday night, carries enough weight to bury an entire life. My name is Ethan Carter, and until that evening, I still believed there was something left worth saving. It was 8:47 p.m. I remember the time because I stared at the glowing numbers on my phone for several seconds before I even opened the message. Vanessa had been working late more often these past few months. At least, that's what she called it. Client dinners, emergency meetings, weekend conferences. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own, and that's the dangerous thing about lies. They rarely arrive looking like lies. The notification appeared while I was rinsing dishes after eating dinner alone. She texted, "I'm staying at Craig's tonight. Don't wait up." No apology. No explanation. Just 8 words. For a moment, I honestly wondered if she had sent it to the wrong person. Craig. The name settled in my chest like a stone. I read the message again. Then a third time. Most husbands would have called immediately. Some would have driven across town. Others would have filled the house with shouting before the night was over. Instead, I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter and finished washing the last plate. The water kept running. The house stayed perfectly silent. Strangely enough, I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something colder. Relief. Not because my wife had admitted she was spending the night with another man. Because after months of unanswered questions, I finally had something I couldn't explain away. For nearly a year, tiny details had been collecting in the back of my mind. Vanessa stopped telling me about her day. She smiled at her phone more than she smiled at me. She started protecting her screen as if every notification contained government secrets. Perfume she never wore for me suddenly became part of her routine. There were dinners that lasted until midnight. Weekend errands that somehow took 6 hours. Credit card charges in neighborhoods she claimed she'd never visited. None of those things proved anything. Individually, they were harmless. Together, they formed a picture I kept refusing to see. Because once you admit the truth to yourself, your life changes forever. So I became an expert at making excuses on her behalf. She's stressed. She's tired. Marriage has seasons. Things will get better. Every lie I told myself felt kinder than accepting reality. Until 8:47 p.m. Until Craig. I picked up my phone one last time and looked at the message. No tears came. No shaking hands. No desperate replies. Instead, I typed exactly 4 words. "Okay, be safe tonight." She reacted with a thumbs up. Nothing more. That tiny icon hurt more than any insult she could have written. I slipped the phone into my pocket, walked into my home office, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside was a small notebook. The first page carried only one sentence. Things that don't make sense. I had started writing in it months earlier, telling myself it was only because my memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be. Dates, receipts, odd conversations, canceled plans, names. Craig appeared twice. I never asked who he was. Maybe part of me already knew. I sat down in the quiet room, turned to a blank page, and carefully wrote tonight's date beneath the others. Then I copied her message exactly as she had sent it. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. When I closed the notebook, I realized something unexpected. The marriage I had spent months trying to protect had ended before I ever received that text. The message hadn't destroyed my life. It had finally set me free. And as I leaned back in my chair, listening to the silence inside a house that no longer felt like home, I made one promise to myself. My next move would not be fueled by anger. It would be fueled by certainty. Because once the truth introduces itself, there's no reason to rush. The truth is patient. And for the first time in a very long time, so was I. The strange thing about certainty is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks into your life disguised as coincidence until one day you realize every coincidence has been pointing in the same direction. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was heartbroken. Because my mind refused to stop connecting dots I had spent months pretending weren't there. At 6 the next morning, I brewed coffee exactly the way I always did. 2 scoops of dark roast. 1 splash of cream. The house felt unusually peaceful without Vanessa rushing through the hallway looking for her keys or asking where she'd left her laptop charger. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I carried my mug into the living room and stared through the front window while the neighborhood slowly came to life. Dog walkers, school buses, joggers. Everyone seemed to be following routines that still made sense. Mine no longer did. I opened the notebook again. The first few entries looked almost embarrassing now. March 12th. Canceled anniversary dinner because of an urgent client meeting. March 28th. Credit card charge at a steakhouse nearly 40 minutes from her office. April 6th. Came home wearing a perfume she'd claimed was a free sample. April 21st. Phone suddenly locked with a 6-digit passcode after years of using the same 4 numbers. At the time, every note felt petty, almost paranoid. I kept telling myself that happy husbands didn't keep records. Neither did trusting ones. Yet I never threw the notebook away. Something deep inside me had refused to let those moments disappear. The more pages I turned, the clearer the pattern became. Vanessa hadn't changed overnight. She had changed one small decision at a time. A late meeting became a weekend conference. Weekend conferences became overnight trips. Conversations became one-word answers. Laughter became polite smiles. Physical closeness slowly turned into carefully measured distance. None of it happened fast enough to sound an alarm. It happened slowly enough for me to adapt. Looking back, I realized adaptation can become its own prison. You learn to live with less affection, less honesty, less eye contact, until one day you forget what normal ever looked like. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Morning. Sorry I fell asleep early. I looked at the message. For nearly a minute. Not because I believed it, because I wanted to understand why she believed I would. The woman who had openly admitted spending the night at another man's house was now pretending the conversation had never happened. That told me something important. She wasn't just lying. She expected me to help protect the lie. I replied with only 3 words. Hope you rested. A small blue bubble appeared, then disappeared. She started typing. Stopped. Started again. Finally, only one message arrived. See you tonight. Nothing about Craig. Nothing about where she'd actually been. Nothing that acknowledged reality. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and smiled to myself. For months I had been trying to solve a mystery. Now the mystery was gone. Only evidence remained. That afternoon, I left work earlier than usual and drove to a quiet park several miles from our house. It wasn't planned. I simply needed somewhere to think. Children laughed on the playground while an elderly couple fed ducks by the pond. Watching them reminded me of the promises Vanessa and I had made 13 years earlier. We had stood in front of our families believing loyalty was permanent. Neither of us imagined that betrayal would arrive wearing ordinary clothes and carrying an ordinary smartphone. I sat on a wooden bench until sunset, replaying every conversation we'd had over the last year. One memory kept returning. About 6 months earlier, Vanessa had mentioned someone from her office named Craig. She described him as funny, then dependable, then brilliant. His name slipped naturally into stories that had nothing to do with him. I never questioned it. Why would I? Spouses talk about coworkers all the time. Only now did I recognize the progression. People don't usually notice when another person begins occupying emotional space inside a marriage. By the time they do, that space often belongs to someone else. When I returned home that evening, everything inside the house looked exactly as I had left it. Our wedding photo still hung above the fireplace. Vacation souvenirs still lined the bookshelf. The blanket Vanessa always folded across the couch remained perfectly arranged. The house looked untouched, but appearances can be remarkably patient. They wait for someone brave enough to stop believing them. I stood in front of that wedding photograph for a long moment. Then I quietly said something I never imagined I would. I know enough. Those 3 words changed something inside me. Not because I suddenly knew every detail, but because I finally understood that I didn't need every detail anymore. I wasn't searching for proof that my marriage could be saved. I was searching for the safest way to leave it. And somewhere, without realizing it, Vanessa had already begun helping me do exactly that. People imagine that discovering an affair happens in one explosive moment. It doesn't. Most of the time, the truth arrives one quiet confirmation at a time until denial becomes harder than acceptance. After telling myself, I know enough, I made another promise. I wasn't going to chase Vanessa. I wasn't going to confront Craig. And I definitely wasn't going to waste energy trying to catch them together. If my marriage was truly over, I wanted facts, not drama. The following week, I watched my own life as if I were standing outside it. Every morning Vanessa kissed my cheek before leaving for work. "Love you," she'd say. The words rolled off her tongue so naturally that I almost admired the performance. "I love you too," I answered. Not because I wanted to lie, because I wanted one more chance to see whether she felt even the slightest hesitation. She never did. That surprised me more than the affair itself. The woman I had married used to blush whenever she told a small white lie. Now she could look directly into my eyes without flinching. One evening she announced that she had another overnight business conference. I simply nodded. "What time are you leaving?" I asked. "Around 5. Drive safely." She smiled. "You're the easiest husband in the world." The compliment lingered in the room long after she'd walked away. Easy. That was exactly what she believed I was. Easy to fool. Easy to manipulate. Easy to predict. She had no idea that I had already stopped measuring her words. I had started measuring her patterns. The conference she mentioned wasn't listed on her company's public calendar. The hotel she casually named had no corporate event scheduled that weekend. Neither discovery proved infidelity by itself, but together, they quietly erased another excuse. I wasn't collecting ammunition. I was removing doubt. There's a difference. Angry people look for reasons to attack. Calm people look for reasons to stop questioning themselves. I had reached the second stage. Every answer made me feel strangely lighter. One afternoon, while organizing old financial documents, I noticed something I had ignored for months. Our shared credit card had gradually disappeared from Vanessa's daily spending. Instead, most of her purchases now came from a personal account we'd agreed to use only for gifts and surprises. At first, I remembered feeling touched. I thought maybe she was planning something special. An anniversary trip. A birthday surprise. A vacation. Instead, she'd simply found a place where I couldn't easily see the details. The realization hurt less than I expected. Perhaps because disappointment has limits. Once you've crossed a certain line, additional pain becomes information instead of injury. Friday evening arrived. Vanessa left wearing a navy blue dress I had never seen before. "You look beautiful," I told her. She smiled warmly. "Thank you." Then she hesitated. "For what it's worth, I appreciate how much you've trusted me." She closed the front door before I could answer. I stood frozen in the hallway. Not because of what she'd said, because of the way she'd said it. People rarely thank you for trust unless they already know they're breaking it. That sentence stayed with me all night. Around 10 o'clock, I walked into our bedroom. Her side of the closet looked different. Only then did I notice several dresses missing. A small travel bag was gone. 2 pairs of shoes had disappeared. She hadn't packed in a hurry. She had been preparing. How many times had she quietly carried pieces of her other life out of this house, while I believed she was simply working late? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space inside the closet. Oddly enough, I didn't imagine Vanessa. I imagined myself. The version of me who had trusted every explanation because trusting was easier than asking difficult questions. That man deserved compassion, not ridicule, because loving someone isn't foolish. Refusing to see the truth forever is. I opened the notebook again before going to sleep. For the first time, I didn't write dates or receipts. I wrote a single sentence across an entire page. She no longer protects our marriage. She protects her story. As soon as I finished writing, I closed the notebook. Something inside me had shifted again. I realized I wasn't documenting her betrayal anymore. I was documenting my freedom. And with every quiet confirmation, one simple truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't waiting for the perfect piece of evidence. I was waiting for the perfect moment to walk away without ever questioning whether I had done the right thing. The biggest mistake people make after discovering betrayal is believing revenge has to happen immediately. It doesn't. Time is far more powerful than anger when you know exactly what you're doing. The morning after I admitted to myself that I was ready to leave, I made a list. Not of everything Vanessa had done, of everything I needed to protect. My future, my finances, my peace, my dignity. For months, my emotions had been driving every decision. Now they were officially retired. Logic took over. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney 2 towns away from where we lived. Not because I expected a dramatic courtroom battle, because I wanted to understand my options before I made a single move. Walking into that office felt strangely surreal. I wasn't there to destroy my wife. I was there to prevent myself from making expensive emotional mistakes. The attorney, a woman in her 60s named Rebecca Lawson, listened quietly while I explained the situation. I never once called Vanessa names. I never raised my voice. I simply described facts. The text, the overnight stays, the financial changes, the growing distance. When I finished, Rebecca folded her hands on the desk. Do you have proof of an affair? I thought about the question for several seconds. Then I surprised myself. I have enough proof to know. My marriage is over. She nodded slowly. Sometimes that's enough. Those 4 words stayed with me long after I left her office. Sometimes that's enough. I wasn't trying to win a television drama. I was trying to build a better life. Over the next several days, I quietly gathered documents I should have organized years earlier. Mortgage statements, tax returns, insurance policies, retirement accounts, investment records. Nothing illegal, nothing secret. Just the paperwork every responsible adult should know how to find. It amazed me how many couples spend decades building a life together without either person understanding how that life actually functions. For the first time, I knew exactly where everything was. Knowledge has a calming effect. Every folder I organized made me feel a little less like a victim. Meanwhile, Vanessa behaved exactly as she always had. She laughed during dinner, asked about my day, sent me funny videos while I was at work. If someone had watched us from outside, they would have assumed we were an ordinary married couple. Appearances are remarkable actors. One Friday evening, she curled up beside me on the couch while we watched a movie. Halfway through, she rested her head on my shoulder. I've missed this, she whispered. I looked at the television without answering. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because I genuinely didn't know which version of her had spoken. The woman sharing my couch, or the woman sending messages to Craig. Eventually, I realized they were both the same person. That understanding hurt more than anything else. People often imagine cheaters living double lives. The truth is usually simpler. They become comfortable switching between different versions of themselves, depending on who's watching. The following Monday, I opened a new checking account in my own name. Nothing dramatic, nothing hidden, just a practical step toward financial independence. As I signed the paperwork, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. Weeks earlier, even imagining a future without Vanessa had filled me with panic. Now it felt like planning a long overdue move. That afternoon, I walked through our house with fresh eyes. The dining table we'd picked together. The artwork from our trip to New Orleans. The couch we'd argued about buying. Every object carried a memory. But memories are strange things. They don't disappear. They simply stop deciding your future. That night, Vanessa arrived home carrying takeout from my favorite barbecue restaurant. I thought we could have a date night, she said with a bright smile. For just a second, I almost believed her. Not because I thought she had changed, because part of me desperately wanted the woman I married to still exist. We ate together. We laughed. We even reminisced about our honeymoon. If someone had secretly recorded that dinner, they would have called us a happy couple. What they couldn't see was the quiet decision I had already made. I wasn't rebuilding a marriage. I was giving myself the emotional strength to leave one. Before going to bed, I opened the notebook again. This time I didn't record anything Vanessa had done. Instead, I wrote another sentence. Preparation is not revenge. Preparation is self-respect. I closed the notebook, turned off the bedside lamp, and listened to the silence filling the room. For the first time since receiving that text, I wasn't wondering what my next move should be. I already knew. I simply wasn't ready for Vanessa to know it yet. There is a moment after you've accepted the truth when something unexpected happens. You stop looking for evidence because you already have enough. Instead, you begin noticing how confidently the other person believes their lies are working. Vanessa had become comfortable. That was the first thing I realized. She no longer checked my expression after coming home late. She no longer invented elaborate explanations for every overnight trip. In fact, she had simplified everything. Work, clients, conference. One-word answers had replaced carefully rehearsed stories. Somehow, that made the deception even more obvious. Confidence is dangerous. The more successful a lie becomes, the less effort it requires. One Thursday evening, she walked through the front door carrying a shopping bag from a boutique I knew was far outside our usual budget. You bought something nice? I asked. Casually. She smiled. It was on sale. Good. She looked almost surprised that I didn't ask another question. The truth was, I didn't need to. A month earlier, I would have wondered where the money came from. Now I wondered why she still thought the explanation mattered. After dinner, she disappeared into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she emerged wearing a new black dress. What do you think? I looked at her carefully. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. That wasn't the problem. It looks great on you, I said honestly. She smiled, clearly pleased. I'll probably wear it to the company fundraiser next week. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. At that point, I had stopped measuring honesty by words, only by consistency. As she admired herself in the hallway mirror, I noticed something strange. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was checking whether she looked impressive. There is a difference. One comes from love. The other comes from performance. The next morning, she left earlier than usual. As the garage door closed behind her car, I found myself standing at the kitchen window with my coffee. Weeks ago, I would have wondered where she was really going. Now I simply hoped she arrived safely. That surprised me, not because I still loved her, because resentment had quietly begun leaving my body. Hatred requires energy. Acceptance does not. That afternoon, while cleaning my office, I found an old photo album from our first years together. There we were at 26, smiling on a beach in Florida. There we were celebrating our first apartment. There we were dancing at my sister's wedding. I spent nearly an hour turning pages, not searching for clues, searching for gratitude. Despite how everything was ending, those years had been real. The laughter wasn't fake. The dreams weren't fake. The promises had been sincere when we made them. Somewhere along the way, only one of us had stopped keeping them. That realization allowed me to let go of something I hadn't realized I was carrying. The need to rewrite our entire history. Not every memory had become a lie simply because the ending hurt. Later that evening, Vanessa sat beside me at the dinner table scrolling through her phone. She laughed quietly. I looked up. Something funny? Oh, just a coworker. Without thinking, she locked the screen before placing the phone face down. Months earlier, that tiny movement would have ruined my entire night. This time it barely registered. People only hide things from someone whose opinion still matters. Ironically, the more she concealed, the less power the secrets held over me. After dinner, she asked if I'd mind spending Saturday with my brother because she needed a full day to prepare for a presentation. Of course, I answered. Thank you, she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Her touch felt familiar, comfortable, almost nostalgic. It reminded me that people can continue performing old habits long after the emotions behind them disappear. Before bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights one room at a time. Living room, dining room, kitchen. Each switch left another space in darkness. As I reached the hallway, I paused in front of our wedding portrait. For years, I'd looked at that picture believing it represented our future. Now it represented our past. Neither version was wrong. They simply belonged to different chapters. I opened my notebook for only a few seconds. This time I wrote something that had nothing to do with Vanessa. The hardest part isn't letting go of the person. It's letting go of the future you imagined with them. I closed the cover and placed the notebook back inside the drawer. The plan was almost complete. The paperwork was organized. My emotions were finally under control. And while Vanessa drifted comfortably through each day, believing she was several steps ahead of me, she never realized that every ordinary moment was quietly bringing us closer to the day when I would no longer be waiting for her to come home at all. There comes a point when waiting stops feeling like hesitation and starts becoming strategy. The hardest lesson I learned was that timing isn't about making the other person suffer. It's about making sure you never regret your own decisions. By the beginning of the following week, every important document had been copied. Every financial account had been reviewed. Every question I needed answered had been answered. For the first time in months, there was nothing left for me to investigate. Only one thing remained. The right moment. I didn't choose it. Vanessa did. It started with a casual conversation over breakfast. I'm thinking about inviting a few people over next Friday, she said while stirring sugar into her coffee. For what? Our company just finished a huge project. Nothing fancy, just dinner. I looked up from my plate. At the house. She nodded. A few coworkers. You know, good food, wine, celebrating. I smiled. Sounds nice. She seemed relieved, almost excited. Then she added something that caught my attention. Craig will probably come too. There it was. The first time she had spoken his name without hesitation, without checking my reaction, without carefully introducing him into the conversation, as if Craig had quietly become a normal part of our lives. I kept my expression perfectly calm. I don't think I've ever met him. You'll like him, she said with an easy laugh. He's really easy to talk to. For a split second, I noticed something change in her eyes. A softness. The kind people rarely recognize in themselves. She wasn't describing a coworker. She was describing someone she admired. Maybe even someone she had already imagined a future with. I simply nodded. I'm looking forward to meeting him. The sentence sounded strange even to me. Not because it was difficult to say, because I realized it was true. I genuinely wanted to meet the man whose existence had finally forced me to stop lying to myself. The days leading up to Friday passed with surprising normalcy. Vanessa cleaned the house more thoroughly than usual. She ordered fresh flowers for the dining room. She spent extra time choosing music. Every detail mattered. Watching her prepare filled me with an unexpected sadness. Not because another man was coming into my home, because she hadn't shown this much enthusiasm for anything involving us in a very long time. It wasn't Craig that hurt. It was the contrast. Thursday evening, as we folded laundry together, she smiled at me. Thanks for being so supportive. I looked at her. Of what? Everything. She hesitated before continuing. I know work has taken a lot of my attention lately. There it was again. Another opportunity to tell the truth. Another decision not to. It's okay, I answered quietly. No, she said. You've been incredibly patient. Patient. That word almost made me laugh. She thought patience meant ignorance. She had no idea patience had become preparation. Friday finally arrived. I left work early and stopped by the grocery store to pick up the few things she'd forgotten. Bread, ice, sparkling water. Ordinary errands for what appeared to be an ordinary dinner. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca Lawson. Everything is ready whenever you are. I stared at the screen for several seconds, then locked my phone without replying. Not yet. There was still one conversation I needed to have. One final chapter that deserved to unfold exactly as it was meant to. When I arrived home, the house barely looked familiar. Candles glowed along the dining table. Music floated softly through the living room. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled the kitchen. Vanessa stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the earrings I had bought her years earlier for our 10th anniversary. She caught my reflection and smiled. How do I look? For a moment, time folded in on itself. I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with. The woman who had once danced barefoot in our kitchen. The woman who believed forever meant forever. Then the moment passed. You look beautiful, I answered. She walked over and kissed my cheek. Thank you for doing this. I watched her disappear toward the kitchen. The house buzzed with anticipation. Guests would arrive within the hour. Craig would walk through my front door, believing he was attending a simple dinner party. Vanessa believed she was hosting another successful evening where two worlds could continue existing without ever colliding. Neither of them understood that this dinner had never been about celebration. For me, it was about clarity. I wasn't planning a public confrontation. I wasn't interested in humiliation. I simply wanted to look every person involved in this story in the eyes before I closed the final chapter of my marriage. As the doorbell rang for the very first guest, I took one slow breath, straightened my jacket, and realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. People think betrayal reaches its climax the moment the affair is exposed. They're wrong. The real turning point is the moment you realize the affair was never the biggest lie. The biggest lie was believing everyone involved understood what they were risking. The first guests arrived just after 6. Co-workers, neighbors, a couple from human resources. Everyone carried a bottle of wine or a dessert. The house filled with polite laughter and harmless conversations about work, vacations, and weekend plans. Vanessa floated effortlessly from one group to another. She looked radiant, confident, completely in control. Watching her, I understood something that had taken me months to accept. She wasn't pretending tonight. This was the life she believed belonged to her. Around 6:30, the doorbell rang again. Vanessa glanced toward the hallway. I'll get it. I watched her disappear around the corner. A second later, I heard a man's voice. Then laughter. When they entered the living room together, I recognized him immediately. Not because I had ever seen him before, because I'd imagined him 100 different ways. Craig was taller than I expected. Early 40s. Athletic. Relaxed enough to make himself comfortable almost instantly. He smiled as Vanessa led him toward me. Ethan, she said warmly. This is Craig. He extended his hand. I've heard a lot about you. I smiled and shook it firmly. I can honestly say the same. He laughed, assuming I meant stories from the office. Only Vanessa hesitated. Barely a second. But I noticed. She was wondering whether my sentence carried another meaning. It did. She simply couldn't prove it. The evening settled into an easy rhythm. People gathered around the kitchen island. Music played softly. Wine glasses clinked. Craig proved exactly what Vanessa had described. Charming, funny, confident without being arrogant. If I had met him under different circumstances, we probably would have gotten along. That realization surprised me. I'd spent months imagining him as a villain. Instead, he looked like an ordinary man making extraordinarily poor decisions. Several times during the evening, I caught Vanessa watching us. Every time Craig and I laughed together, she seemed relieved, as though the greatest danger wasn't the affair itself. It was the possibility that two versions of her life might collide. Then something unexpected happened. Craig wandered into my home office while looking for the downstairs bathroom. I found him standing in the doorway, studying the shelves lined with old family photographs and books. "You've got a great place," he said. "Thanks." His eyes stopped on a framed picture of Vanessa and me taken during our 10th anniversary trip. "You two have been married a long time." 13 years. He nodded slowly. "That's impressive." There was something different in his voice now. Less confidence, more curiosity, almost uncertainty. I realized then that Vanessa had probably told him a very different version of our marriage. Maybe she described us as emotionally separated. Maybe she'd claimed we were staying together out of convenience. Maybe she'd said the divorce was only a matter of time. Affairs survive on carefully edited realities. I wondered how much of the truth Craig had actually been given. Before either of us could say another word, Vanessa appeared in the hallway. "There you are," she said a little too quickly. "Dessert's ready." Craig smiled. "Coming." As he walked past her, I noticed something almost invisible. She touched his wrist. Only for a second. A movement so natural most people would never notice. But they also separated just a little too fast. The reflex of two people accustomed to hiding. Later, after dinner, everyone gathered around the patio with coffee. Stories became louder. Laughter came easier. The atmosphere felt almost carefree. I stood quietly beside the grill, watching the people in my backyard. Then I looked at Craig. He was telling a story while everyone listened. Vanessa couldn't stop smiling at him. Not the polite smile she'd been giving me for months. The real one. The effortless one. Oddly enough, that was the final piece I needed. Not evidence. Closure. For weeks I'd wondered whether there was still something worth saving. Watching them together answered that question more clearly than any text message ever could. This wasn't a mistake that had spiraled out of control. This was a new life already taking shape. As the last guests prepared to leave, Craig shook my hand once more. "Thanks for having me." "My pleasure," I replied. And for the first time all evening, I meant every word. Because meeting Craig hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me. As I locked the front door behind the final guest, Vanessa wrapped her arms around me from behind and whispered. Tonight went perfectly. I stared into the dark living room ahead of us. She was right. It had gone perfectly, just not for the reasons she believed. Because while she thought she had successfully kept two worlds from colliding, she had unknowingly given me the peace I needed to leave both of them behind forever. People assume the hardest part of leaving is saying goodbye. It isn't. The hardest part is realizing the person you're saying goodbye to left long before you did. The morning after the dinner party, the house felt unusually quiet. Vanessa slept late. I sat alone on the back patio with a cup of coffee, listening to birds that had probably been singing every morning for years without me ever noticing. Peace has a strange sound. You only recognize it after living with noise for too long. My phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "Everything is prepared. Just let me know when you want to move forward." I read the message twice. Then I replied with only 3 words. "Monday morning works." There was no anger in my fingers as I typed. No hesitation. Just certainty. When Vanessa finally joined me outside, she looked happier than she had in months. "I think everyone had a great time." "They did." She smiled. "I'm glad Craig finally got to meet you." "So am I." She searched my face for a moment. Maybe she expected a complaint, a question, some small sign of jealousy. Instead, she found none. She leaned down and kissed my forehead before walking back inside. That tiny gesture almost broke my heart. Not because it meant anything, because it used to. Monday arrived with clear skies. I left the house before sunrise. Rebecca's office opened at 8. By 9:30, every necessary document had been reviewed one final time. Every signature had been placed exactly where it belonged. When I finished, Rebecca closed the folder gently. "How do you feel?" I thought about the question. "Lighter." She smiled. That's usually a good sign. As I walked back to my car, I realized I hadn't once imagined Vanessa's reaction. For months, Every decision had revolved around how she might respond. Now the center of gravity had shifted. My future no longer depended on her emotions. That afternoon, I rented a small furnished apartment across town. Nothing luxurious. One bedroom, large windows, a quiet balcony overlooking a park. The first thing I placed inside wasn't clothes. It was the notebook. The same notebook that had begun with confusion, then suspicion, then evidence, then acceptance. I opened to the final blank page. For several minutes I simply stared. Eventually, I wrote one sentence. Today I stopped surviving and started living. I closed it forever. There was nothing else left to record. Tuesday evening I returned home carrying takeout. Vanessa was in the kitchen humming softly while preparing salad. "You didn't have to bring dinner," she said. "I wanted to." We ate together like we had hundreds of times before. Comfortable, polite, almost peaceful. Halfway through the meal, she looked up. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "We should plan a vacation." I nearly smiled. Not because the idea was funny, because timing can be astonishing. Sometimes people try hardest to preserve something they've already abandoned. "Where would you like to go?" I asked. She laughed. "I don't know yet." Neither did I. The difference was that I already knew I wouldn't be going with her. After dinner, we washed dishes together. Her shoulder brushed mine several times. She talked about work, a new project, another upcoming conference. I simply listened. Every sentence reminded me how natural lying had become. Not dramatic lies, just constant little ones. Enough to build an entirely different life. That night she fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake watching the ceiling. There was no sadness left, only gratitude. Gratitude that I had discovered the truth before spending another decade pretending everything was normal. Gratitude that I had chosen patience instead of revenge. Gratitude that I was leaving with my dignity intact. Wednesday morning I woke before dawn. I quietly dressed for work. Before leaving the bedroom, I looked at Vanessa one last time. She looked exactly like the woman I'd married. Peaceful, familiar, completely unaware. People often ask whether I still loved her at that moment. The honest answer is yes. Love doesn't disappear overnight. Trust does. And without trust, love slowly loses the place where it can live. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the front door. Inside was the folder Rebecca had prepared. Everything was ready. Everything except the conversation that would finally end 13 years of marriage. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, I realized something Craig had unknowingly taught me. He hadn't taken my wife. He had simply revealed that the woman I believed I was married to no longer existed. That realization didn't make leaving easier. It made leaving necessary. I opened the front door, stepped into the cool morning air, and closed it quietly behind me. I didn't know exactly how the next chapter of my life would unfold. For the first time in a very long time, that uncertainty didn't frighten me. It felt like freedom. The best revenge is rarely the one people expect. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't end with someone screaming or begging for forgiveness. The best revenge is waking up one day and realizing you no longer need the person who once had the power to break you. I came home that Wednesday evening carrying the last folder I would ever bring into that house. Vanessa was sitting on the couch reading. She looked up and smiled. "You're home early." "I am." She set her book aside. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Can we talk?" There was nothing unusual about those 3 words. Couples say them every day, yet something in my voice must have sounded different. She slowly sat up. "Of course." I took the chair across from her instead of sitting beside her. That single decision placed more distance between us than the room itself. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Finally, I slid the folder across the coffee table. She looked down, then back at me. "What's this?" "My decision." She opened the folder. The moment she saw the first page, the color disappeared from her face. "No." Her voice was barely audible. "Ethan." I didn't interrupt. She turned another page, then another. Her hands began to shake. "What is this?" "It's the divorce paperwork." She stared at me as though she were looking at someone she had never met. No. We haven't even talked about this." "I know. We can talk now." I smiled gently. "We're talking now." Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. "Is this because of work?" I looked at her quietly. Even then, even with the truth sitting in her hands, she offered another version of the story, another chance for reality to bend. I shook my head. "It's because of choices." She swallowed hard. "What choices?" For the first time in months, I spoke Craig's name aloud. The ones that started long before you texted me you were staying at Craig's. The room became perfectly still. She froze. Every explanation she had prepared for every possible conversation disappeared in a single heartbeat. You knew. Since that night. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Ethan, I raised my hand gently, not to silence her, to free her. You don't have to explain anymore. I never wanted to hurt you. I believe that. I made mistakes. I know. It didn't mean I stopped loving you. That sentence lingered between us. Perhaps she believed it. Perhaps she needed to. But love without honesty becomes something else entirely. I spent months trying to understand what happened, I said quietly. I blamed myself. I wondered what I could have done differently. I kept looking for the moment I lost you. She lowered her head. I finally realized something. She looked up through tears. I never lost you. You chose to leave long before I stopped holding the door open. She covered her face and cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the quiet sound of someone watching two different versions of their life collide. Several minutes passed. Finally, she whispered, "Is there anything I can do?" Months earlier, I had dreamed she might ask that question. Now it no longer mattered. There was. Her shoulders trembled, but it belonged to another version of us. I stood. She instinctively reached for my hand. I let her hold it for a moment. Not because I had changed my mind. Because kindness costs nothing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know. I never thought you'd leave." I smiled sadly. Neither did I. I picked up my overnight bag from beside the front door. The house looked exactly as it always had. The wedding photographs still hung on the walls. The furniture remained in the same places. The clock still ticked above the fireplace. Nothing inside the house had changed. Only the people living in it. As I opened the front door, Vanessa called my name one last time. I turned. She was standing exactly where I'd left her. Small, heartbroken, human. For the first time in months, I saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but someone who would have to live with her own choices. And I realized something unexpected. I forgave her, not because she deserved it, not because she had asked, but because carrying resentment would have chained me to a marriage I was finally leaving behind. "I hope you find what you were looking for," I said softly. Then I stepped outside. The evening air felt lighter than I remembered. I placed my bag in the car, climbed into the driver's seat, and looked at the house one final time. It had once been the place where I planned the rest of my life. Now it was simply an address. I started the engine. As I drove away, my phone lit up with another message. It wasn't from Vanessa. It wasn't from Craig. It was from my own calendar. New apartment. Move-in day? I smiled. Months earlier, one text message had ended my marriage. Today, one simple reminder marked the beginning of everything that came after. And that was the moment I finally understood. She thought leaving me would become the start of her new life. She never realized that, in the end, it became the beginning of mine.